Okay, imagine this. A neighborhood feud, right? But it's not about fences or loud music. This one's been simmering since 1947,
Long time.
a really long time. And instead of angry words, you've got armies, missiles, and even the, frankly, terrifying threat of nuclear weapons hanging over it all.
Yeah.
And then the picture of this powerful outsider, America, constantly stepping in, like I don't know, a really stressed out referee trying to stop things from just completely exploding.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually, because that's essentially the story we're diving into today. The U.S.'s long, very complicated dance with India and Pakistan.
Right. It's not straightforward at all.
Not even close. We're talking decades of diplomatic balancing acts, military aid shifting back and forth, interventions in high-stakes crises. Our goal here is to really unpack this tangled history.
Understand America's role in this rivalry that just seems to endure. What were the key moments? What was driving the U.S. actions?
And ultimately, what does it all mean? For the region, obviously, but also for the wider world. It's a relationship with huge implications.
Exactly. And you've shared some fascinating material with us, clearly aiming to cut through the daily headlines and get to the deeper strategic stuff.
That's the plan.
So we'll highlight those surprising turns, the moments of real high drama, and the kind of strategic thinking behind this whole tangled dance, as you called it.
Well, the story really has to start with the partition of British India in 1947. You can't understand anything without understanding that moment.
The split.
The split, creating India and Pakistan. But it wasn't neat. It was messy, violent, and it immediately planted seeds of conflict, especially, as everyone knows, over Kashmir.
Beautiful place. Tragic history.
Absolutely. Think of it like a really bitter inheritance dispute, but with massive geopolitical consequences.
And then boom, the Cold War kicks in almost immediately.
Right, adding a whole new layer of complexity. The U.S. finds itself trying to juggle relationships with both these new countries.
And in the 50s and 60s, it seems Washington leaned more towards Pakistan.
Initially, yes. You see defense pacts, like the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement in '54. Pakistan gets pulled into anti-communist alliances. Kyoto, CENTO,
The goal being,
countering the Soviets, containing communism. That was the lens through which Washington viewed almost everything back then.
but they didn't completely ignore India.
No, that's the interesting part. They were also sending economic aid to India, even though India, under Nehru, was fiercely non-aligned, didn't want to pick a side.
So playing both sides. Or trying to.
Trying to maintain balance, maybe. It was a very delicate act right from the start, trying to keep options open while pursuing those Cold War aims.
And that balance got tested pretty hard in the '65 war over Kashmir.
Definitely. The U.S. tried neutrality, suspended military aid to both sides.
Which must have annoyed everyone.
Oh, it absolutely frustrated both capitals. But, some argue that cutting off the weapons might have actually helped end the war quicker, maybe inadvertently. Neither side could really sustain it without that outside help.
Interesting. Okay, let's jump to 1971. The war that led to Bangladesh. That seems like a major shift.
A huge shift. And this time, the U.S., under Nixon and Kissinger, clearly tilted towards Pakistan.
Why the tilt?
Geopolitics, big picture stuff. Pakistan was secretly helping the U.S. open up relations with China, a massive strategic prize for Nixon in the Cold War chess game against the Soviets.
Oh, the China card.
Exactly. And India, meanwhile, had just signed a friendship treaty with the Soviet Union. So, the lines were drawn pretty clearly in Washington's eyes.
It wasn't really about the conflict itself, though.
Less about the conflict on the ground, more about the great power competition. It really shows how those larger strategic goals can sometimes override other considerations.
And the U.S. didn't just offer political support, right? They sent a carrier.
He did. The USS Enterprise sailed into the Bay of Bengal, a definite show of force, a signal of support for Pakistan.
Wow. And we know now, from declassified documents, that Nixon and Kissinger weren't exactly fans of India's leadership at the time.
No, their private comments were pretty scathing. But look, in the end, the U.S. stance didn't stop India from winning the war or prevent Bangladesh from becoming independent.
But it damaged relations with India.
Significantly, left a real scar. And for Pakistan, it was maybe a hard lesson that U.S. support could be conditional depending on America's broader interests.
Okay, let's fast forward again. Late 1980s, things get even scarier.
Nuclear weapons. Both India and Pakistan developed them.
Suddenly, this regional fight has potentially global Catastrophic consequences.
Exactly. The stakes just went through the roof.
Yeah.
And the U.S., which had, armed Pakistan for years,
Mostly against the Soviets in Afghanistan, right?
primarily, yes, now faced this terrifying prospect of a nuclear arms race between two rivals it had relationships with.
So U.S. policy had to change.
It did. You get the Pressler Amendment in 1990. Basically, no more major military aid to Pakistan unless the president could certify they didn't have the bomb.
Which he couldn't.
Couldn't, truthfully, no. So the aid got cut off. A big deal for Pakistan.
Then 1998 happens.
Tit-for-tat nuclear tests. India tests. Pakistan responds just weeks later.
Global condemnation. Sanctions.
Yep. Widespread outrage. U.S. sanctions on both countries. But did it fundamentally change their hostile stance towards each other? Probably not much.
But something else did emerge around this time, didn't it? During the Kargil War in '99.
Yes, a really important shift in the U.S. role. President Clinton got directly involved, put heavy pressure on Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to pull his troops back from the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir.
And it worked.
It did. And this is where you really see the U.S. solidify that role as the, what one source called the off-ramp provider.
The mediator with leverage.
Exactly. The indispensable player who could step in during a crisis, dial things back, give both sides a way to de-escalate without totally losing face.
Then comes the 21st century. 9/11 changes everything again.
Completely reshapes the landscape. Suddenly, Pakistan is a crucial partner for the U.S. again, this time in the fight against the Taliban and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
So aid starts flowing back to Pakistan.
Significant amounts, yes. A renewed strategic partnership focused on counterterrorism.
But at the same time, the U.S. is also getting closer to India.
Right. It's fascinating. This is when you see the U.S.-India relationship really start to blossom, moving beyond the old Cold War suspicions.
Culminating in that big nuclear deal in 2008.
The Indo-U.S. nuclear deal, exactly. Hugely significant. It basically brought India into the international civilian nuclear fold, despite it not signing the Non-Proliferation Treaty. A major strategic bet by the U.S. on India's future.
So Washington is now juggling these two very intense, complex relationships with countries that are still deeply suspicious of each other.
A very tricky balancing act, walking an even finer tightrope than before.
And then terrorism strikes again, aimed at India but linked to Pakistan. The Parliament attack in 2001, Mumbai in 2008.
Horrific attacks, and both times, India and Pakistan came dangerously close to war. Full-scale war.
And the U.S. steps in again.
Absolutely crucial role. Intense diplomacy behind the scenes. President Bush on the phone, Condoleezza Rice flying back and forth, shuttle diplomacy.
Using that leverage.
Using its influence with both capitals to urge restraint, facilitate communication, prevent things from spiraling out of control. It became almost a pattern.
A pattern that continued, like in 2019 after the Pulwama attack.
Same dynamic. Pulwama attack, Indian airstrikes in Balakot, Pakistan shoots down an Indian jet. Tensions sky high.
And the U.S. involved in de-escalation again. Even President Trump claimed a role.
Yes, reports suggest U.S. intervention played a part in cooling things down. It's this recurring theme. Crisis erupts, brinkmanship. U.S. steps in as the off-ramp provider, even though, the underlying tensions and cross-border firing often continue at a lower level.
So let's break it down. Why does the U.S. stay so involved? It seems exhausting.
Well, several big reasons. First, and most importantly, the nuclear danger. A nuclear war between India and Pakistan would be catastrophic, not just regionally, but globally. No responsible power can ignore that.
Okay, the ultimate nightmare scenario. What else?
U.S. strategic interests. They evolve, but they're always there. Pakistan's role regarding Afghanistan was key for years. Now, India's rise is huge economically, militarily. It's seen increasingly as a counterweight to China in Asia.
Ah, the China factor again.
It looms large. Maintaining influence in South Asia, keeping both India and Pakistan somewhat aligned with U.S. interests, is partly about balancing China's growing power and its very close all-weather friendship with Pakistan.
So preventing either country from falling too deep into Beijing's orbit.
That's certainly part of the calculation. Plus, there's perhaps a sense in Washington, a kind of self-perception, that America is the indispensable nation, the one that has to step in and manage global crises.
Whether invited or not. Sometimes.
Sometimes. But often in these specific India-Pakistan crises, both sides have, perhaps reluctantly, looked to Washington to help find a way out.
So the stakes are massive.
Yeah.
Beyond just India and Pakistan.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Two nuclear powers, constant tension. A major war could mean economic chaos, huge refugee crises, wider instability. It ripples outwards.
So the U.S. role, messy as it might be,
And it often is messy, criticized by both sides at different times.
has arguably helped prevent those worst-case scenarios.
You could make a strong case for that, yes. It hasn't solved the underlying problems, not by a long shot, but it has perhaps managed the symptoms and prevented full-blown catastrophes on several occasions.
So looking ahead, we're talking mid-May 2025 now. The situation is still tense.
Seems to be the default setting, unfortunately. Friction along the line of control continues. It feels like the U.S. will likely need to keep playing that mediator role, ready to step in when the next crisis inevitably flares up.
But are there new challenges to that role?
Definitely. China's influence isn't shrinking, it's growing. Both India and Pakistan are continuing to modernize their militaries, including their nuclear arsenals. These factors make that delicate U.S. balancing act even harder.
So the big question is, can the U.S. keep managing this effectively?
Yeah.
Given how the world is changing.
That is the fundamental question. Can the strategy of engaging both, balancing, providing off-ramps, can it hold in the face of these evolving geopolitical realities? It's uncertain.
So it's clear, listening to all this, that America's story with India and Pakistan is just incredibly complex. Decades of shifting strategies, delicate diplomacy, moments of real, terrifying crisis.
All tracing back to that original partition, that messy beginning. It's a tapestry woven with strategic interests, Cold War calculations, counterterrorism needs, and now great power competition with China.
Hopefully this deep dive has helped shed some light on why this rivalry, which might seem far away to some listeners, has demanded so much American attention for so long.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder. In our world today, regional conflicts, especially between nuclear-armed states, have global consequences. You can't just ignore them.
And it definitely leaves us with some critical questions. Can the U.S. keep playing this role effectively? How will China's rise change the game in South Asia? And the biggest question of all, perhaps, what will it actually take for India and Pakistan to find a way to lasting peace?
Those are the multi-billion-dollar questions, aren't they? Huge questions to think about as this very complex, very high-stakes dance continues.